No, your eyes do not deceive you. That is in fact a squadron of Thunderbarges leading the Dawi spearhead into the countryside of Bretonia. We have a new Tier 5 airship courtesy of CJ Soldier and Chaos Roby, and today we'll see what complete and total air superiority means on the battlefields of Warhammer 2. Maybe. Here's the thing. The Norskins know they're coming, and they prepared plenty of throwing axes for the occasion, not to mention the hordes of angry barbarians, monsters, and mammoths of Icedrake Fjord. It's going to be an interesting one, as a faction not well known for their flyers or ranged options attempts to grapple with the mechanized beasts invented by one gifted Slayer engineer. Now this is a new mod, and it may still be working out some kinks, so do forgive the turning animations, which are perhaps a tad bit more dramatic than they should be, and in fact would likely spill their contents out the side and plummet the entire garrison to the ground below. But other than that small gripe, the form and function of this unit is gorgeous. I mean, it looks legit and performs a very unique role for the Dwarfs. So as you'd expect, this is a weapons platform with a big HP pool, tons of firepower and ammunition to keep the volleys coming. It has a massive single target cannon mounted on the front, and when it turns its flank, it will automatically unleash broadsides at nearby enemy units. If they get too close, the deck sweepers up top will fire down with handguns and engineer rifles for a bit of extra punch. But the units at knee level are just as scary. Dwarfs are going for that epic snare strat, pairing Rune of Slowness with the power of Dragonback. Any unit that gets hit by both those will be moving with a minus 80% speed reduction, which is a death sentence really when Thunderers and Trollhammer Torpedoes add their voices to the chorus. Legitimately scary army here for Norsca to deal with. So much monster killing potential, so much range firepower, so many ways to quickly delete units if they're mismicroed for but a moment. Gotta be on your A game if you want to break open these layers and feast on the squishy stuff at its center. For the forces of Norsca, the Miststalkers are Vanguard deployed in the back of the map, ready to make some sneaky guerrilla plays and put their armor sundering to work, and for obvious reasons, this will be a rush-focused build, plenty of great weapons, AP options, and the Soul Crusher Mammoth to boot. Now, I would love to use War Shrines or other Mammoth variants more, but Norsca has no healing, so in lieu of getting HP back, ward saves that prevent loss of HP in the first place are one of the only options for keeping them alive under withering salvos from gunpowder and Trollhammer torpedoes. 3 Marauder champions, 2 Marauder hunters for their shield breaking and AP missiles, and Wolfric the Wanderer on his chariot in the back will have an important role to play here as well. So as the game gets underway, Thunderbarges have 440 range. They can fire at you from clear across the mountainside, and their opening fire isn't going to be incredibly impactful because it's just a single cannon. That part isn't so problematic. We also have a Shaman Sorcerer, by the way, with Soul Blight and Purple Son of Xarius on a chariot for some of that extra infantry mulching potential. But you still have to worry about those cannons, right? Because if they're firing at high value stuff like the Mammoth or the Fimir, that will rack up some damage. The missile resist on the Fimir should help to an extent, but if you're Norsca here, you really want to close the gap quickly. There's just too much firepower for you to have to worry about if you sit back and kind of trade blows and do some skirmishing with the throwing axes. You're gonna be in a world of hurt pretty quickly. Now, the skirmish aspect is still important here. Even though Norsca doesn't want to sit back, they still want to zone out those Thunderbarges and make them shoot those kind of inaccurate wild broadsides from long range, rather than being able to turn and focus their prow forward onto the Mammoth or onto those Fimir. The throwing axes are actually very good at zoning out the Thunderbarges. They have a large HP pool, but it's not massive. It's 5,700, which is about the same size as many units of heavy cavalry. And so you get some good throwing axe volleys in on them, and they will feel it in the morning for sure. Of course, the cannons opening up fire now too. Marauders in the front ranks, they'll be mowed down. Not many of them will make it into melee. Blasting charges will certainly not help that either. Ekron's miners are moving up in the center, and you know they're licking their lips in anticipation, ready to blow some naked barbarians into Kingdom Come. That's why they're so short. Much more efficient for blowing naked barbarian dudes. Kappa. We're not just dealing with one Thunderbarge today. Things are getting out of hand. Now there are 2 of them, including the Wrath of Thunder Regiment of Renown, which causes terror. Certainly an interesting unit. Variety of ways that can impact the battlefield, and alternating between using that main cannon and unleashing the broadsides at the right time makes these Thunderbarges quite dynamic and a lot of fun to use. We've already seen some of that here. I can't really do anything to completely zone them out at the moment. The Marauder throwing axes can help to an extent, but if I get in the middle of the fire arc, that's when the cannons and the thunderers and all the other things will open up, and they're opening up now. Front ranks of Marauders completely eviscerated by those opening volleys, and here comes the main gun again, killing 4 or 5 models, easily positioning itself to enfilade down the length of these battle lines. Now, on the approach, it's important for Norsca to limit the power of the Dawi guns, which is why we're overloading their left flank, staying out of range of the units on the Dwarfs' right. If you were to go in head-on, then all those units in the blue would be firing as well, and Dwarfs wouldn't have to move. That's playing right into their hands. By overloading one flank, the ranged troops have to reposition, and that's when they get out of position, when the perfect onion formation starts breaking down by itself. They move too far forward, they put themselves directly behind their own infantry so they can't fire, and then I have just less things to worry about in the initial approach. But one of the elements that makes these Thunderbarges so powerful as the Fimir charge in and start beating up on the Dwarf phalanx is that they can so easily set up on the side of infantry formations and fire down the length of the battle line, something regular Dwarf artillery typically cannot do. So finding a way to zone them out completely or get them out of the sky early is important, but they have so much mobility, I'm not sure that's even going to be a possibility. You might just have to let them do their thing and focus on getting rid of all the other troops first, then forcing them down into melee combat. The Mammoth will certainly help with that. When it's busting through Dwarf phalanxes like if they're not even there, running over, using those stampeding hooves and those goring tusks to cause some serious problems in the Dwarf back line, things should work out pretty well in the opening stages. There are not enough ranged troops on this side to deal with the Soul Crusher Mammoth and the Miststalker Fimir Vanguard deployed coming in from the rear. Nice combination. Now Wulfric is in a bit of a precarious spot because he went for the Trollhammer torpedoes to shut them down and prevent the Soul Crusher from taking a bunch of volleys early. Problem with that is that he just took the Rune of Slowness and now comboed up with the power of Dragonback. That's an 80% slow on my lord. That could be an issue. At the moment, not taking a crazy amount of damage because he's still on the move, and Slayers don't do lots of damage to moving targets and need the unit completely bogged down, so he was actually alright, but a bit of a butthole puckering moment as the Marauder throwing axes move in from the rear. Now this is kind of a catch-22 here. You want to save all those throwing axes for the Thunderbarges to make sure you have enough damage and DPS to bring them down. The issue is that there are a lot of ranged troops that have moved over now and are in a good position to fire in on the Soul Crusher and the rest of the important monster units for Norsca. So sending in the fast movers to tie down the range stuff is kind of important. I'd argue maybe a bit overzealous there, losing a full throwing axe unit. Probably not worth to just temporarily tie down a unit of Thunderers, but there's just so much firepower here, it's kind of scary to let it go unchecked for any significant amount of time. Norsca has broken the Dwarf left flank pretty quickly, actually. They crumped them with Soul Crusher and Wulfric on that side. It makes sense. It was a full army versus half an army. Now they're collapsing in the middle with Soulblight going down in the center, and the two Thunderbarges still wheeling and dealing overhead, dropping some of those salvos from close range. Throwing axes on this side, firing into the Longbeards, breaking those shields open, although you would still like to fire in from the unshielded side if possible. And Marauder Champions going after the Longbeards as gyro bombs drop from overhead. And remember, Thunderbarges don't just have those broadside options and the big cannon on the front. They can also drop bombs from above, and I think they might even be more powerful or about as powerful as gyro bombs. I think they have less bombs, but they're just as strong, which makes sense. They have a lot of room for armaments up there overhead. Fimir trying to bust through the Dragonback Slayers and get at them. Broadside into the routed Marauders. They will return to the fold pretty soon here. And you see that the onion layer for the Dwarves has broken down, but they still have full-strength melee troops in reserve, including Slayers. All the range options on that right flank, including Trollhammers, Thunderers, and the cannon, are still online, and the Dwarfs have responded very well to that flank overload, scrambling into position in preparation for that next assault. Now, potentially a big mistake here. Soul Crusher Mammoth spots an opening on the Thunderers and Trollhammers, has plenty of infantry support, including a Sea Fang ripping through the flank, but Dwarfs held their ground there, and they have a brutal cone of fire, which the Mammoth found itself right in the middle of, and the enraged ward save had not come off cooldown yet, so he face tanked the brunt of all that gunpowder, and that was a painful lesson. Would have been better served going around and waiting a few more moments longer to attack. He's routed off, he will return, but the Fimir and the Mammoth both took a ton of damage there, and that's a big loss for Norsca. Keeping the Soul Crusher around into late game with a solid amount of HP would have been huge to have that late game terror and just options for dueling the Rune Lord, killing Slayers, and what have you. And he kind of got caught up when he charged in. He wanted to go through, but he got caught up on the Slayers and stopped his charge animation. And take a look at that Rune Lord going for a ride. The Footlord changes had some janky things come alongside them, and that's one of them. Rune Lord doesn't get knocked out, which is great. Instead, we get to see him skateboard halfway across the map and then skateboard all the way back. Look at that Rune Lord, dude. Like, what the hell is he doing right now? That looks so goofy. Anyway, Wulfric's done dealing with that for now. He can't seem to kill him quick enough. Trollhammer torpedoes are definitely a more dangerous option anyway, so they're dead after a few throwing axes and a charge from Wulfric, who was going in and causing lots of havoc. Shaman Sorcerer, overextended, got caught up in the Dragonback Slayers, slowed down. He's going to go down pretty low, and Norsca's losing a lot of their important units here, and there's still a lot of Thunderbarge HP flying overhead. Here's the thing, though. Soul Crusher just came back. There's still plenty of throwing axes on the map, and at some point Thunderbarges will have to land and go into melee anyway, and they only have 4 melee defense, so they'll get dragged down pretty quick if they're forced into a melee grind. And the Oliphant's Mr. Frodo coming in from behind. Huge charge into the back of the cannon. Getting rid of that thing will be incredibly important. And here come the throwing axe volleys. Thunderbarge down to half HP pretty quick. Purple Sun Azarius destroying a huge section of the Dwarven infantry. Now the Marauders are blobbed up on their phalanx, or the remnants of that phalanx. I guess there isn't many dwarfs left after that Purple Sun, but there won't be many Marauder champions left after those bombs either. So I think it's actually like the Skyhammer gyro bombs. It's kind of a cluster bomb rather than a single explosive, and it literally deleted an entire unit of Marauder great weapon units. My lord. Very painful stuff. But you can see that the dwarfs are kind of reeling right now. All their infantry and ranged options, besides the Thunderbarges themselves, have pretty much been shut down, barring a handful of Dragonback Slayers and a few miners. The throwing axes have a perfect surround off on one of the Thunderbarges, which is down to 500 HP and dropping fast. It might explode here very soon. Soul Blight not helping its case, lowering the armor down from 100, and Soul Crusher's alive still. And it'll take like maybe 2 attacks from him to kill off that Rune Lord. Wulfric did get his ass beat though. Again, that Rune of Slowness and Power of Dragonback combination kind of snared him down, and the Dragonback dudes beat on that butthole. But he's alive. He's coming back now. Marauders are still alive too. All these throwing axe units are going to be so important as we move into the late game, and Soul Crusher doing whatever it can to make sure they are kept alive by destroying those Thunderers. But here comes those single entity cannons again, mounted on the prow of each Thunderbarge. Soul Crusher's taking a lot of damage from those. Throwing axes forced to fire into the Slayers, which have the speed to catch up to these Marauder Hunters. And Wulfric and the rest of the Norscan army with a full surround off on what remains of this Dawi army, which, to be fair, both are just completely in tatters. Wulfric is YOLOing up the center. He wants those Dragonback Slayers dead. Should be able to get rid of most of them with one throwing axe volley and a good charge from the chariot. But while these axe-hurling Vikings are focused on all the ground troops, the Thunderbarges are still above, firing in with their single entity cannons, and Wulfric has to be afraid of that. Soul Crusher's obviously afraid of that. He's broken off and is running towards the edge of the map. Sea Fang ripping through the flank, and Norsca's going to be able to kill off the rest of the dwarf troops that are in the center. But there's a Thunderbarge with 26 HP hanging out in the back of the map. There are 4 Trollhammer torpedoes left somehow, and there's still that Wrath of Thunder, which has a lot of health. Now, the throwing axes are still alive. Wulfric should be able to finish off this Trollhammer unit, but ouch! Taking a painful cannon shot, and Norsca absolutely unequivocally needs Wulfric the Wanderer to stay alive. He could kill the rest of this infantry, but if they can't do that and force the Thunderbarges down, then it doesn't matter. And in fact, he routed off, and a Trollhammer torpedo, one model with 20 HP remaining, shoots one single missile and kills Wulfric, who also only had 20 HP. Never seen anything quite like that before. A single troll hammer. You can see the dwarf leadership has just been insane this battle. One of the things that kind of differentiates them from every other faction in the game. These units with almost no health managing to stay on the field. A Thunderbarge coming back with 26 HP itself, and that was enough to hang on and keep that balance bar pushed far enough to force army losses on Norsca. Would have been interesting to see what would have happened if Wulfric had survived there, if he didn't take that kind of unlucky cannon shot in the rear, and if the first Thunderbarge that had 26 health had been killed off by one or two more throwing axes. That would have definitely changed the balance bar, and army losses would have kicked in much later, and perhaps not at all. Could have been a really crazy finish, but as it was, very close and interesting battle there, and a good showcase for the Thunderbarges and what they can do. Certainly not a unit you want to bring against factions with fantastic aerial options. Bretonnia would be a problem for them, of course, with their Royal Hippogriffs and Pegasus and all that. Would be curious to see how they would do against a faction like the High Elves. My guess would be not so great. I don't think you want them against dragons. I don't think you want them against phoenixes. You certainly don't want them against all that focus fire from long-range archers. But yeah, I mean, they did great in this battle for sure. 3,000 damage value, 1,000 on the other, earned some chevrons. Trollhammers and Thunderers were so scary. And I think a lot of it boiled down to just a few micro mistakes. It doesn't take much when you're up against a powerful dwarf army like this one with all those ranged troops. If you put an important unit in the wrong spot for but a couple seconds too long, Trollhammers and Thunderers and all those ranged options will obliterate you. And then, of course, you got to keep those throwing axes alive to the late game. And if you don't, the Thunderbarges will shoot you with impunity. I think I could have had that, honestly, but Pajab played that very well. Responded well to the flank overload. Got his troops in the right position and just kept blasting away. Wore me down. Killed my important stuff off near the end, and at that point, it was just too much. Army losses kicked in, and that was your battle. So GG, and if you want to see any more Thunderbarge action, let me know. See you guys next time. Peace out.